thanks a lot, and good morning. Welcome also from my side. I'm happy, and it's an honor for me to give an introductory presentation setting the scene about the challenges and opportunities for sustainable cooling solutions. Next slide, please. What you or we all know that is cooling demand strongly has been growing in the past years and decades, as we can see here on the chart on the global scale. But this growth does not necessarily need to continue. So growing cooling demand is not a natural constant or a natural law per se. As we can see in this scenario from the IEA, in the net zero emission scenario, the cooling demand can be stabilized until 2030, while still meeting an increasing amount of cooling services and increased comfort in building. If you click, please. Then we can also see that on the European level, there is a number of scenarios available, also showing the possible development pathways. Click, please. One thing that we can see first is that we already in the starting point, in the base here, data is scarce and uncertain. So we already have in the starting point quite significant deviation and range of data between the different sources. There has been a lot of efforts to close this gap, and COOLIFE is one of these efforts again, but still we have a lot of data gaps. By the way, I think it would be beneficial if you could mute the mic from the large room. Thanks. Yes, and then the question is, when we look at this at the gap of these different scenarios, we see quite high range between the expectations. What could be cooling demand in 2050? And the question is actually, what can we do to reduce cooling demand? So what are the reasons for this high differences between scenarios? Next slide, please. And we had a look on it for the Austrian case, where we can see a quite significant potential of reducing cooling needs through passive measures. In the upper graph, you see a case of, let's say, more moderate impact of climate change. And in the bottom figure, you see a scenario with a higher impact of climate change. So the blue bar of the baseline in both cases is increased through climate change, but of course in the hotter scenario a more significant increase is expected. But at the same time, in both cases we see that shading and night cooling can strongly decrease consumption and even outweighing this potential increase through climate change. An additional reduction can be achieved by increasing indoor temperature, so behavioral adaptations, efficiency, and all that can lead to significantly reducing cooling energy needs. Next slide, please. So this was the message of the role of passive measures, passive cooling measures, and the role of sufficiency. But of course, we will need active cooling as well. And here the question is, what are alternative space cooling technologies? Still, the majority of cooling demand is met by conventional vapor compression systems. But a lot of alternative technologies are available, and being further analyzed, being investigated, being further developed. Still, we see that most of the alternative technologies are either not yet competitive or lack technological readiness. Despite this huge variety of active cooling solutions that we see, basically it's one question that drives also the efficiency of active cooling. Next slide, please. And this question is mainly where to dump the heat. Cooling means we use electricity to extract heat from the buildings. You could click once, please. And if we use air as a heat sink, this means we dump the heat to the ambient. We dump the heat to the ambient air, and in the urban context, this means we also contribute with this active cooling solution to urban heat island effects, making the problems even worse, increasing the air temperature further, and the efficiency, the seasonal performance factor, actually is a function of this air temperature, depends on this air temperature. So using air as a heat sink, as it is often done and usually done, is not necessarily the solution with the highest efficiency. Next slide, please. But we can also find other solutions where to dump the heat. And this is to use the ground as a heat sink. If you could click once, please. So when we manage to use the ground to dump the heat, we can increase the efficiency of the system on the one hand side, but we also do not contribute to an accelerating urban heat island effect. And the third solution, next slide, please, is to remove the excess heat from the neighborhood through district cooling solutions. Of course, this district cooling also needs energy input. If you could click, please. So the district cooling plant also needs an energy input, also needs a heat sink. The temperature of this heat sink determines the performance factor, the efficiency of the cooling solution. But overall, we ensure that the heat is removed from the neighborhood. So that's this question, where to dump the heat, has a strong effect, and this will also be discussed later on in the more detailed presentations. Next slide, please. The European Commission, the European Union acknowledged the fact that cooling is relevant also in the renewable energy statistics. So the share of renewable heating and cooling is, as the term already says, the sum of renewable heating and renewable cooling. So it needed a framework, a method, the new method, to account for the share of renewable cooling in energy statistics. And basically, according to the Renewable Energy Directive, this quantity of renewable cooling is the cold supplied to the buildings multiplied by with this factor SPF, which is the share of the cold supply being qualifying as being renewable. And click once, please. And this share of the SPF depends strongly on the efficiency of the system. So SPF again stands for seasonal performance factor, and this will be affected strongly by the technological progress expected, and as I tried to explain above, by the use of low temperature heat sink. So by increasing the SPF, also this share will increase and the share of renewable cooling will increase. So that's the idea, to provide an incentive to member states establishing measures for incentivizing, supporting, enforcing efficient cooling solutions. Next slide, please. We try to quantify this effect of renewable cooling on the total RES-HC shares. And as you maybe know, the Renewable Energy Directive imposes a target of a yearly percentage increase of renewable heating cooling of 1.3 percentage points, depending on the conditions. But now the question is, what can renewable cooling contribute to that? The blue bars and the green bars show this potential contribution of renewable cooling to this target. And we see that in southern countries, in particular Cyprus, Malta, Greece, Spain, renewable cooling can provide an essential part to this target achievement. But we also see that with lower efficiency, what is depicted in the green bars, the contribution of renewable cooling to the RES-HC target is also lower. So in principle, there is an incentive towards increasing efficiency of cooling systems being imposed via this concept of the Renewable Energy Directive to the member states. However, it still remains to be seen to what extent this trigger, this incentive, this scheme really will work to actually enforce improvements in the cooling sector. Next slide, please. It's not only the Renewable Energy Directive, it's also the Energy Efficiency Directive, which covers cooling as well and promotes cooling plans as well. Municipalities, according to the new directive from 2023, municipalities with a population of more than 45,000 will need to elaborate local heating and cooling plans. So far, the common practice of local heating plans means that they are strongly focused on heating, tend to neglect cooling. So we did a wide screening of heating and cooling plans, local heating and cooling plans in different countries. And actually, we only found one case so far where cooling was also included. And this is something where there seems to be also a gap of tools, of methods, of data to do that. Also, on the national level, member states need to develop the comprehensive assessment of efficient heating and cooling potentials that already existed in the previous Energy Efficiency Directive. And we see that from these assessment reports, cooling in general is underrepresented and often neglected in member states' assessments. And this is largely also due to a lack of data and lack of information. Next slide, please. So we see a lack of data, a lack of information, a lack of tools also to visualize information. Next slide, please. We also see a lack of knowledge on related laws and regulations, lack of awareness of alternative innovative space cooling solutions, a lack of knowledge regarding barriers and drivers for innovative space cooling solutions. And now COOLIFE will take the user needs as a starting point and develop a tool, a knowledge hub to map space cooling, demand, comfort, lifestyle-related regulations, laws to be able to empower target users also to do their analysis on a certain territory and derive recommendations for policymakers, regulatory bodies, planners, industry, and business representations. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the next presentations, and back to you, in particular Simon, who will now continue with a much more detailed presentation of the COOLIFE project.